when I was a kid, we did this thing. Maybe you did something similar, where when it came to sitting in the front seat, when it came to being next to your best friend, we would say spot check. And there's no going back on it. Spot check, no changes. Shotgun, no changes, none of it. And if someone called it, they had it. There's no changing it. It was an absolute. And today, that's exactly what we're talking about. Absolutes. And the idea that certainty might be the very thing that's making us lonely. My name is Jairus Copeland. Welcome to In Need of Attention. And today we're going to be going into absolutes, what they are, what that means, and how your own internal absolutes can affect you, whether they be positive, negative, or indifferent. And we'll get into the minutia of that, all those different things. I'm live with you today, kind of, from Cincinnati, Ohio. It has been raining for 2 months. I am dressed like a mechanic for those watching. And I put on shoes for you. So you're welcome. Thank you for being here. We're going solo today. And I got some notes here for you this is really something that's kind of been at the top of my mind as I've interacted with my family or my friends or my wife, or I've just noticed certain things going on kind of in our culture and kind of just in the world around us. And you saw the title when you clicked on it, but the title of this is The Alternative to Absolutes. And I want to kind of provide a perspective, a framework, a paradigm, if you will, that I think could help us deal with some of the areas where we struggle relationally. Some of the areas where we develop tension simply out of our own desire and or need to be right. And all an absolute is having to be certain, having to be right. So if I believe something absolutely, there's no changing it. It's set, it's limited. This is what it is. This is the answer, right? 2 + 2 has an answer. It's 4, right? What I wore to this podcast, a myriad of options for those who know me, right? A myriad of solutions. And what I want to propose to people today is that their need to be right and their need to be certain is compromising and at the cost of the relationships in their life. For me, my entire life, I've been someone who has been pretty curious, if I'm being honest. I'm curious about people. I'm curious how things are made. I'm curious how things work. I'm curious to understand things. And what I've found is a lot of people don't think that way. I'm on this endeavor in the business world, and when you come to them with nuance, they're going, I don't want that. I want cold, hard facts. Okay, Coors Light. What do we know about this product? What do we know about this service? What do we know about this focus group? And what is certain? How can I know what my return will be? How can I know what my investment's going to be? And what I want to say to someone who believes things certainly, who feels like they're right, who believes certain things to be absolute, is that there isn't wrong with standing on something, having things foundationally to you that make you who you are, right? I've talked about my faith. I certainly believe that Jesus was real. I believe he lived, died, came back to life, did it all for me and you, right? That's certain in my mind. And if I want to live a limited existence, I will be continuously certain about that, rigid on the ends of that, and I won't interact with anyone who doesn't agree with me. And that is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's limiting. And that's really one of the big points I want to highlight here is that when you are dealing in absolutes, when you have to be right, when you're dealing with certainty, you're dealing in a limited existence. And your need to be right and your need to get your point across ultimately could be something that's compromising the people closest to you. And if I'm posing the question and posing the problem that certainty could be something that's compromising you, well, then what's the answer? What I would say to that is, it's not a matter of an answer, but it's a matter of what is the solution. And that's part of the thinking I kind of want to counter today, is this idea that when you're certain about things, it's because there's an answer. And as I've lived, as I've experienced things, as I've grown, whether it be spiritually, in my marriage, With my family, I'm totally going to burp. I can feel it. Excuse me. Leave it in, Kate. Leave it in. That's what she said. Sorry, that's so bad. Anyway, what was I even saying? When it's certainty, there's a right answer. When it comes to those right answers, that's what we know. That's what we believe. And ultimately, it can compromise us because we don't allow for anything outside of what we believe the answer to be. And when we face problems, we come up short because there's only one answer. And if I don't have the answer, how am I going to get past this, right? Sorry, I'm going to drink so much water during this. And when there's only one answer, we're quite literally limited, right? The opposite of being certain is being curious. So when we're curious, there's an opportunity for possibility, right? And certainty handicaps and limits possibility. So when I'm curious, that just means I'm open to more perspective. I'm open to other solutions outside of what might be just the one right, true answer. And I think culturally, what makes me want to respond in this way is just seeing how certain people are. How people not only have to be right, they need to be right. And if they're wrong, then they can never be made right. They're just held to what they said. They can never change. They can't believe anything different. And an effort and an intention of being inclusive and allowing everyone to be a part and a seat at the table, which is a great thing, we've become exclusive. Where if you don't believe the same thing as me, whereas you don't think the same thing as me, then you can't sit with us. And that won't be the only Mean Girls reference I make today. It's off-putting. I have people in my life that I love to death, and they're off-putting. You know why? Because they have to be right. They have to be certain. They know the answer. And when a situation comes up that has nuance and it has multiple layers, if you're to hold them to what they would hold you to, you are being divisive and you're being oppressive, if you will. And what I would say to someone who feels certain in their own ways but would contradict someone who feels certain in their other ways is maybe just consider how similar you might be before you consider how different you are. And when it comes to being curious versus being certain, I want to be curious because anything I'm believing for, anything I'm trying to build or shape will be made infinitely better by other people. Right? I heard it said that if you have a vision for your life, you should not make it the Mona Lisa, but you should make it a mirage. I think I've said this before, probably. I only have so much material, right? Energy seeker, you know what I mean? And the reason you would leave it a mirage is because you're leaving room for other people to contribute and collaborate. And the value of collaboration is we're not meant to do things alone. And what I found is the more certain you are, the more lonely you are, right? This is on every end of the spectrum, from someone who feels like they are an outsider and who they are is not accepted in their family or their social circles or their society. And so they retract, they go inward. They feel like it's all them, right? They isolate. That person's lonely. And it's because they believe certainly that who they are is not accepted. On the other end, right, there's maybe like a person who shares the same faith as me, right? They're a Christian, and then they get this term of like being like very religious, in that instead of knowing the person of Jesus, they're much more familiar with the laws and rules that he died for and abolished, right? And in their intention of helping people see like, hey, there could be a better way, or hey, like these are things that are good things and will help your life and whatever, they're so certain and right that they aren't curious about who people are. And the most successful people, the most effective people are people who are curious, not certain. If you're a business person, you'll get way more business being curious about people you're reaching out to instead of being certain to the people you're reaching out to, right? There's nothing worse than the used car salesman. There's nothing worse than someone who's going to try to manipulate you and corner you and give you all these crazy situations and absolutes to prove their point, as opposed to going, hey, what are you looking for? Hey, what do you need? How can I help you? And offering maybe a perspective or a lens shift on something that you might not have considered before. I think ultimately, someone who is curious is someone who wants to be a collaborator and someone who's open to a much more unlimited experience in their life. And I'm not trying to pose curiosity as being more valuable than certainty, because one isn't necessarily better than the other, but one without the other is an incredible imbalance, right? And as we are trying to live, right, sitting in tension, living a life of tension, imbalance is the biggest indicator that we might be compromising something that we don't want to, right? How certainty and curiosity shape us, those things play out in our actions, right? And so this whole thing started with absolutes. It shifted into a conversation about certainty and curiosity. Just for a moment to go back to the absolutes, if curiosity and certainty are the external outputs, will the internal inputs have to do with how we view ourselves, right? I would call that our internal absolutes, right? The things we believe about ourselves, right? And it's really hard to change. I'm talking about being curious versus certain. I'm talking about not just thinking you're right only and there's no room for other people to grow and you're not the problem. You probably are. I know I am. But that starts with what I believe about myself. That starts with what I believe about other people, right? If I just believe no one's trustworthy, I believe I can't depend on anybody, I can't be vulnerable, I can't put myself in a position to allow myself to fail or lose or not get what I'm looking for, I'm living a limited existence because of what I believe about others and myself. Versus if I put myself in a position to go, you know what? This could go horribly wrong. It could go exactly how I don't want it to. And if this is what I want, this is what I desire, I would be a fool not to put myself out there. That's like, to me, dating 101. Sure, you had a breakup. Sure, they rejected you. Sure, it was a hard time. And if you really want this, whether it to be with someone, companionship, marriage, a family one day, why would you not put yourself back out there? Why would you not put yourself in a position to find and look for exactly what you want? Right now, I'm going into the coaching space, right? I'm offering people coaching, right? So I facilitate and help people identify their own cadence, right? Their rhythm and flow when it comes to creativity, connection, and communication. And it's for a professional, someone who speaks on stages, works creatively, is employing other people, right, on the connection front. But it also goes on a personal level. If you're interested, you can go to jairuscopeland.com. And the intention of it, the point of it, is to help people become more curious first about themselves before they can be curious about other people. Because no matter what any of this stuff is, ultimately, if you don't have it yourself, you're never going to be able to give it. And so when you feel a certain way, when you feel strongly about something, when you feel even indifferent about something, you should ask yourself the question, why? Right? Why in this moment do I feel this way? Why in this moment do I just not care? Why in this situation am I so passive? And as you inform yourself about yourself, you'll start to understand and shape the voice and perception you have of your own self. And these are what you would call your internal absolutes, right? They could be positive, they could be negative. I think the good sweet spot is right in the nuance and middle of that, right? So a positive absolute for me would be, I'm a great husband. And I do think that. I do think I'm a great husband. And if anyone ever says anything that speaks against that, and that's what I believe about myself, I will never be able to receive the criticism, feedback, or maybe even valid points that someone's presenting to me, because it would change my internal perspective and the positive internal absolute I believe about myself. Because in this situation, if I'm not a good husband, I don't know what's true anymore, right? And it's the same on the negative side. If you said, If I said, hey, I'm a horrible husband, I'm the worst, I do everything wrong, all these things, and I believe that, when my wife tells me good job, or that she's proud of me, or that she really appreciates how I've been there for her, I won't be able to receive it. I won't be able to accept it because it counters what I believe about myself. And the healthiest thing I could believe is actually somewhere in the middle. Some version of, I'm a great husband who loves my wife, does his best to support her, and I miss the mark, miss expectations, and come up short way more often than I'd like to admit. And accepting that and understanding that that is fluid, that that can change, that over time, not only will I grow, but she'll grow, and our relationship dynamic will even change. But it allows me to progress. It allows me to make mistakes. And it makes me think of when I was in high school and we had math, right? You had to show the work. And if you showed the work and you did the work wrong, but you got the right answer, it was still wrong. To me, that's what living a certain life is, right? It's, these are the steps, this is the logic, these are the things, this is the answer. The problem is, you can't make any mistakes. And because you can't make any mistakes, the stakes are way too high. There's no way to meet the moment every time. And the most mundane, simple things become life or death, all or nothing. And the reality is, if everything is life and death, everything is all or nothing, everything is right and wrong, red and blue, Coke and Pepsi, there's no room for us to just be innately human. And in this case, what I would call being innately human is being uncertain. The reality is we have no clue. We do not know. And that's hard. It's hard to accept. And a lot of people don't. And I understand it. I don't accept it in a lot of cases. But through the internal absolutes we have, that shapes how we act, which can be certainty, which could be searching for a right answer. And ultimately, when we don't know the answer, when we feel uncertain, when we're feeling like a human being, we become anxious. And a lot of times anxiety is a necessary evil because it's better to be anxious than to not have the answer. And so many of us, I'm not saying this is specifically your cause, but we're anxious just because we don't know what's coming. If you've ever traveled abroad, maybe with someone who hasn't traveled a ton or is older or just doesn't have that much experience with it, they're not very receptive to the idea, right? So let's say I came to someone and I was like, hey, let's go to Spain. And they'd never been out of the country before. They're going to have questions about how long the flight is. What does this look like? How are we going to get around? Do they speak English? What, all the necessary and good questions to ask to be able to shape their own answer, their own desire to go, all these things. And the reason they're asking all these questions and they're anxious about flying or going or how they're going to get around or being in a foreign place isn't a bad thing. It's just simply they don't have the experience. And it's the same thing in our everyday life is you might be experiencing an emotional feeling for the first time and going, I've never had this experience before. And so you're anxious. You might be experiencing something relationally where you're going through a breakup or you're going through a career change or you're going through that your dog just died and you were really close to him. And you're going, hey, I haven't had this experience before. And it makes me more anxious for what's next. It makes me more anxious because I don't feel like I have the answer. And what I would say to that person is I get it. And as I say all this stuff, I'm speaking from experience. I've been more anxious in situations and I've internalized it and felt the physical symptoms and pain of that anxiety because I didn't know what was next. I didn't know what was on the end of transition. I didn't know what was on the end of what feels very new. And that anxiety and that need for control to not only control the situation so that you can control the outcome, you're limiting and constraining the life you were meant to live. And what I'm not telling you is don't be anxious because that's so hard. But what I am telling you is that anxiety shouldn't be something that motivates you to take uninformed action, but it should be a telltale sign of, hey, something's going on here. Something is putting me in this kind of crisis mindset, crisis mentality. And in crisis, certain people act very different than curious people. I've got kind of a versus kind of framework to talk about here. Pitting a curious person versus a certain person. So in crisis, right? So a curious person, an anxious person. In crisis, an anxious person will ruminate and blend fear with reality. And so what does ruminate mean? Ruminate just means, hey, I am worried about a situation, right? Here's an example. A girl I was texting ghosted me. Okay. The story I make up in my head is a part of that rumination. So she stopped texting me. I had a thought, well, maybe this happened. And off of that thought, I had another thought and another thought and another thought. And next thing I look up, I have no clue how much time has passed. I've been all in my mind and I've created an entire storm and tornado of thoughts solely based off the fear I have of the situation, that none of any of what I've come up with is rooted in the reality of the situation. I've blended my fear and what I think could be the worst case scenario with what is actually happening. What's the reality? This person stopped communicating with me. What is my fear? It's for these reasons. And an anxious person will conflate the two, right? In crisis, a curious person separates the facts from the reality. And so what they say is, here's the fact of this. I like this person. The fact of the situation is they stopped communicating with me. And the other fact is, I don't know why. And I have to learn that if I never interact with them again, or I do talk to them again, that the reality of the situation isn't something that confirms all the things that I might think in my head, but it's something that might inform the things I think in my head moving forward. And for a curious person, they feel the same feelings, but they're not just going to jump to the conclusion and take action based off of it, right? In crisis, an anxious person elevates the stakes. So it becomes life or death. It becomes all or nothing. It becomes a matter of, I either love them unconditionally or they're the worst. I hate them. I never want to talk to them again, right? I keep talking about relationships. That's just because I've messed up relationships a lot. So I have a lot of ammo. You know what I mean? I remember being in a breakup and the person just blocked me immediately. And it wasn't a breakup where I felt like it was overly negative. I felt like it was pretty amicable. And I didn't truly understand it. And really what it was is that the culture of the moment and what you're supposed to do is, oh, well, I'm not with that person. Well, screw them. They don't exist anymore. They are literally dead. I don't have to see them. I don't have to talk to them. I don't have to know that they exist, which makes it way easier on me to move on and just forget it and not actually go through the mourning and loss that I might feel because I had a connection with this person. And I never was really a blocking person. I think I've blocked 2 people in my life and I wasn't really in a relationship with either of them. I just didn't like them. And for me, the value of not doing that was, sure, as a young man, I'm 26 saying I'm a young man. When I was like 20, I was incredibly emotionally unbalanced and unstable, and just that's honestly why most of my relationships didn't work. But to me, the feeling was something I had to go through. Otherwise, I was just going to project that on the next person. And since a kid, I've known I wanted to be a husband and a father. And even though I wasn't living a life that would reflect the person who could do those things at that time, I knew that the only thing I could do was keep putting myself out there. And so I had to go through the feeling. And it was really hard. And there were days where I would just cry, or I'd be so sad, or I would just internalize and feel physical pain in my stomach and my heart, and my head would hurt, and I would just be lethargic. And it was horrible and taught me so much. And now if I see that person out, or they come across the feed, or something happens, it doesn't spiral me and take me back to that place. It reminds me of not just the lessons I learned, but maybe some of the good things that happened in that relationship. And so when it comes to being curious in the situation, instead of elevating the stakes, a curious person takes inventory before establishing the stakes. And being curious in a situation, they go, okay, what is the lay of the land? Let's take inventory. Am I okay, right? You're feeling for wounds. Am I hurt? Am I safe? How is this affecting me? What's going on? And based on that, they'll elevate the risk. They'll elevate the stakes if necessary, right? There's a big difference than if you punch me versus if you shoot me. If you shoot me, I should probably elevate the stakes. And you should go to jail. That's neither here nor there. When it comes to being in crisis, anxious people act off the impulse of how they can control a situation in an effort to control the outcome. Curious people ask, what can I control and what can I not control? And they allow that to dictate their actions. I've alluded to this a little bit through here, and that this is a great example. My wife, Sarah, is much more action-based, which frankly is more acceptable in the society we live in. And so I am much more internal. I'm an introvert. I think way more before I say things, before I do things, not that she doesn't. And when we have conflict, what we've had to learn is how do we give the other person what they need more than just what we feel, right? And so acting off of impulse, I'm ready to have conflict right now. Let's talk. You need a minute to find out how you feel? No, you don't. I could tell you how you feel. You feel this, this, and this, and I can tell because you wouldn't do this if you didn't feel that. And what I can do out of my anxiousness in the moment is I don't want to let this sit and fester because I'm afraid of having to sit through the feeling, and I know how bad it will hurt. So I'm like, let's rip it off right now. When she's impulsive, she's going to say things and she's going to act and she's going to do things. I'm going to go, why would you say that? Why would you do that? You don't need to apologize now. The impact is felt regardless of the intention. And what we've had to learn is for her, not acting impulsively is being more mindful of what she says or does immediately. For me, not being impulsive means I'm not pressing her to go into conflict immediately. I'm not expecting her to just know how she feels, know what to say, know how to apologize, know what I'm saying. I have to give her time. And both of us out of that place, when we are acting impulsively, it's because we're trying to control the outcome. How do I not get hurt the worst? For her, it's defensive. For me, it's offensive, ironically. What would be the best for me not to get hurt? Going into this immediately so that I don't have to let this sit and fester and scab over and all that stuff. For her, how does she not get hurt? Distance, space, get away from me. I'll alienate you. I don't care. Just back up because you hurt me and I need space. And so when we take a step back, we try not to just control the situation, control the outcome. We have way healthier conflict and actually have conversations that allow us to grow and understand what the other person is saying and move forward in that way. When it comes to being in crisis, anxious people value anxiety because it gives them answers. And not having an answer is worse than being anxious. So if you've ever met someone who says, I'm just very intuitive. I just have really high discernment. I just know. What they're really saying is, I believe these things. And I always believe them. And when they are proven right, I have more fuel to believe that's how all people are. That's how all things go. And I have confidence in that. And that is warranted. You know, people do things. People are consistent. And we're all human. We make not just mistakes, but the same mistakes over and over again. We don't learn typically very easily. We learn the hard way. And so that can shape our habits, our forms, what we believe about people internally. And so that changes how we behave externally. And in that situation, anxiety becomes a necessary evil because I'm okay being anxious and worried about these things happening because it pushes me towards an answer. And if you're looking for someone to betray you, you're looking for the type of person to cheat on you, you're looking for the type of person to be dishonest, you'll find that type of person. And you'll continue the cycle. You'll continue the circle. Versus if you're curious and you don't believe in that, you would say that you accept that things won't always have an answer. And the phrase, I don't know, will become a badge of honor. I say I don't know probably more than anybody I know. And it's because I don't know. And if I tell you I don't know, I'm hoping you do and you share it with me. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think in an age of certainty and everyone's right and everyone knows what supplements to take and how to work out and how to make my golf swing better, everyone knows. And yet, they find themselves in similar places as me. anxious, scared, worried, shameful, experiencing uncertainty in human form. And for me, being curious when it comes to having the right answer, I've just learned I don't have the right answer. A lot of the times, I don't even have an answer. I'm going to have a couple solutions though. I got some things that maybe right now could help us. I got some things that maybe big picture might be the right thing. And in the moment, it might be a little step, or maybe you could help me figure out what we should do moving forward. But so much of the human experience we have, how we are acting, what we believe about ourselves internally, the absolutes we tell ourselves and believe, they're shaped by our desire to know who we are, to have the answer to who are you. And whether we're 23 or 65, the answer to that question is ever changing. It's radically shifting. And it's shaped by the things we believe and the experiences we have. And what we believe about ourselves will influence the experiences we have. And all of this just continues in a cycle, in a circle. And the effort I want to make is to break negative internal beliefs and the negative experiential cycle. I also don't want to only have positive internal beliefs just so I can have positive external outcomes, because that's also not realistic. I think people who are overly positive are more annoying to me than people who are overly negative. Overly positive people are delusional. Overly negative people are just like a bummer. I want to be around overly negative people because I had a good day. I feel good. Overly positive people, I'm just going, one day you'll be honest with me. And one day you'll accept that you have no clue what's going on. And when that day comes, we're going to have an amazing conversation. But until then, it feels kind of disingenuous. And so for the overly positive person, maybe communicate and accept, hey, not everything has a positive twist, and you can live in the nuance of, despite these compromising or uncomfortable circumstances and the uncertainty I feel, I can have a positive outlook despite those things, versus just everything's good all the time, everything's good. And for the person who is only negative, you've got people around you. You've got positive things going on. You have things working for you. Have some hope. Allow people to encourage you. Find a person you trust and say, hey, this might sound kind of weird or selfish. Could you tell me some things you like about me? Could you encourage me? People make fun of me for it. I'm like, hey, I'm going to encourage you. And my hope is that you'll do it back. And whether you do or don't, it would just mean a lot to me. And in relationship, I find being honest about, hey, yeah, I just feel like I can only do wrong here. Like there's not much encouragement. That goes a long way with people when they realize like, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. Whether it's right or wrong, I can make an effort to try to encourage you more. For any person out there who's experiencing those symptoms or those feelings, know that you not knowing, saying I don't know, is okay. And just because you don't know now doesn't mean you won't know later. I'll close this out here. And I'll make kind of two references here. So for the anxious person, for the certain person, the person who has to be right, your need for an answer is inherently selfish. And being selfish is a human thing. I can think of several instances this past week where my wife said, hey, you're being selfish. Hey, why are you doing this, right? And your need to be right, your need for an answer, your need to be certain is you trying to answer and deal with internal struggles, internal absolutes, internal beliefs that are compromising your life externally. And they're limiting you. You are Anakin Skywalker doing a bunch of stuff, hurting a lot of people, because you're searching for something. And I'm not trying to tell someone who's an anxious person that they're the worst. But what I am trying to tell them is you can be better. And that better isn't a huge change. It's accepting that you might not know the answer right away and you might not know exactly how to handle just about everything. Welcome to life. And on the other end, for a curious person, for someone who wants to be curious, for someone who is curious and is trying to strike the middle of that tension, what I would say is it's like Mean Girls. At the end of the movie, when she's at the math cathlon thing, and they ask the question, and the answer is, the limit does not exist. And she said, the limit does not exist. The limit does not exist. When you live a life of curiosity, the limit does not exist. The answers, the solo answer, when you're curious, turns into an infinite field of possibilities. Not all equal, but there's so many other ways this could be solved. It could have a temporary solution, a long-term solution, an intermediate solution. When I look at the things in my life and the person I am, when I remain curious about other people and their perspectives and their ideas, I don't have to agree with all of it. I don't have to bow down to it. I don't have to adopt all of it. But it can inform how I communicate and view the things I believe, the hills I'm willing to die on. And for a person who's anxious, curious, anything, what I would like to instill, what I want them to know, when it comes to your internal capacity, what you believe about yourself, and how you act outside of that, when it comes to your business and your professional life, your family life, your personal life, the limit does not exist. That's all I have today. We're talking about internal absolutes. Thanks so much for listening. I hope a shred of that made sense to you. We'll see you next time on In Need of Attention. Goodbye.